further discuss Phainon's connection to Nanook. I know I already went over this in my last video, so this video was not a planned video I wanted to make, but there's a few details I overlooked. And last night I had an epiphany when looking at the design and logo of Amphoreus, the Infinity Loop. Because this whole idea of Phainon, Nanuk, the Lord Ravagers, goes way deeper than I initially thought, so I simply had to address this. And the more I looked into it, the crazier it actually got. Looking at some of the finer Easter eggs and details, something that Hoyoverse loves to do in their games, and I just overlooked some of these things. So I'm going to be going over that with you guys in this video. And I'm honestly surprised, for the most part, it seems that the vast majority of people enjoying this story are on the same page or a very similar page to me when it comes to Nanook, Phainon, and Amphoreus. But I will address some of the concerns some of you had with my theory, one of the biggest ones being that we already know Nanook's history. So how could it be something different than the history we already know? We'll go over all of that in this video. I am going to assume you watched my last video on this topic, because I do not want to repeat all of the information I had in this video. But to briefly summarize what I talked about, it was the potential of Phainon being the Aeon of Destruction, and Amphoreus being a story of Nanook's ascension, Phainon's obvious connections to the Flame Reaver, the three Aeons involved here, the Black Tide potentially connected to Rupert I, and the anti-organic equation, how Nanook and Phainon actually look similar. The Chrysos heirs bleed golden blood. Look at Nanook. All of the sun motifs on Phainon, and then Nanook's darkened sun above his splash art in any instances that we see him. Welt even referring to Kevin in that conversation with Acheron from his own world, a sun chaser. Amphoreus being known as the Eternal Land, with an endless cycle of survival, war, and the Titans. The Chrysos heirs killing the Titans, taking the core flame, becoming the new Titans, rinse and repeat. How Amphoreus likely has a very Avengers Endgame or Attack on Titan type story going on here, where past, present, and future collide with each other. Those are all the main talking points I went over. If you want the explanation and the detail of that, you can watch the video. If not, that's fine. Those are just the things we went over. Now, one thing I actually did not talk about in that video because I didn't think it really related to Nanook is March 7th. March 7th obviously has ties to Amphoreus, and she's one of the most mysterious characters in the game, right? We found her encased in ice, and her name isn't actually March 7th. She very clearly has a connection to Mem and Cyrene, who just happens to be Phainon's childhood friend. Somebody teased heavily in Amphoreus, but we have not seen or heard of this character. For all we know, March 7th could be Cyrene, now known as March 7th, with no memories of what happened. And honestly, when it comes to March 7th, the possibilities are endless. She could very well be like an emanator of remembrance, hence why the Titans call her Mother. When seeing her camera, maybe March 7th was tasked with trapping a Lord Ravager here, the Lord Ravager we now know we don't want released into the cosmos, and along the way had her memories wiped, removed from her body, and now her body an empty husk, which we found that has to form new memories and consciousness. Again, there's a lot of possibilities with March 7th, but if March 7th happens to be Phainon's childhood friend, Cyrene, it puts one of the earliest scenes in the game in a completely different light. If you recall, Nanook gazed us very early on in this game. Do you remember how this occurred? It originally occurred when we stepped in front from March 7th, protecting and shielding her in the opening battle. And we all just assumed because we had the Stellaron in our body, the whole game's new and mysterious at this point, we're not really reading too much into these little details. Nanook gazes us right then and there, which was even weird at the time, but now looking at it from a different perspective, if Phainon does ascend to be the Aeon of Destruction, which there's a ton of subtle and not so subtle Easter eggs pointing towards this, doesn't it put this whole beginning sequence in a completely different perspective? It makes this whole opening so much deeper and foreshadowing something huge. something we're currently playing through right now, even back then. And this is something that Hoyoverse is not shy to do either. Another detail I missed that some of you actually pointed out in the comments was Phainon in this trailer, how his scars even look similar to Nanook. But at this point, it doesn't even seem like they're trying to be subtle with this. Next, it's the Amphoreus logo itself, because obviously it's an infinity loop, which signifies the Chrysosaurs, Titans, Core Flame, Rebirth, War, Survival, the Endless Cycle. That's Amphoreus, obviously. And we know Amphoreus is much different than any world we've been to before, since we don't exactly know what's happening. Are we living through the present? A past memory of events in a time loop? We're not exactly sure, but the rules and what make up Amphoreus is vastly different than anywhere we've been. But Amphoreus is not just an infinity logo, it's also a Mobius strip. And this has many significant meanings, like a timeless journey, or can be symbolic. The Mobius strip teaches us that our authentic and thriving selves, the faucets of our lives, must align and become congruent. While this doesn't mean revealing every aspect of yourself to everyone, it does require reducing conflict between your external actions and your eternal values. And it's obviously the symbol they use on recycling bins. It has a recycling meaning, which fits Amphoreus. But it also fits Phainon and his character. And it also fits Kevin from Honkai Impact 3rd, which Phainon's based off of. It fits both characters and their stories. And the Mobius strip itself is an anomaly among our mathematical and geometrical understanding of things. It's like that old saying, it's a piece of paper but with a twist. It's the perfect symbolism of something that doesn't quite make sense like it should, which perfectly fits Amphoreus and everything we suspect. But then look at Nanook and his design is one of these strips, but it's broken, signifying that when Phainon ascended into Aeonhood potentially, maybe the cycle was broken, which is why on Nanook's design, it shows two Mobius strips by his hands, but the cycle is broken. That is the significance of Amphoreus. He broke out of the cycle in the loop, something we already speculate that the Flame Reaver is already doing in the game. The Flame Reaver could very well be a future version of Phainon trying to stop the Chrysos heirs to enter Era Nova. There's a reason for all of this to happen. Is this a coincidental design choice on Nanook? Am I overthinking it? Perhaps.
Coincidence? I think not!
But it's just one more thing I noticed that links this whole thing together. And the symbolism of it really does fit. Phainon, his tragic past, him being the unsung hero of Amphoreus, the guy that's talked up by everyone, an imperfect, genuine human that wants to save humanity. It all just fits so nicely together. Even the word Nanook itself is Inuit for polar bear. Nanuk was known as the master of polar bears, deciding if hunters deserved success in finding and hunting bears, and punishing violation of taboos. Now you could say this might have a few similarities in Phainon and Amphoreus' story, but I definitely feel this one is a bit of a stretch. Maybe it's to do with how polar bears are white, Phainon and Nanuk both have whitish hair, and Phainon is the White Knight of Amphoreus. A White Knight being somebody that helps people in a difficult situation. They enact justice. So the symbolism of Nanook being the White Knight of Amphoreus before he ascended into Aeonhood as Phainon does sort of fit, but again, this could be a stretch just trying to justify Nanook's name and meaning, the symbolism behind it, so I just thought it was worth pointing out. Now, one of the biggest problems people had with this whole theory is that we already have a vague description of Nanook's ascension, his origin, the planet he comes from, around the end of the Swarm disaster. So this whole idea of Amphoreus being the ascension and creation of Nanook rides on the fact that what we've learned about Nanook is false. But you gotta remember, misinformation of the past and history in Honkai Star Rail is a very big part of the world building and lore of Honkai Star Rail. It's not something small. The IPC is one of the biggest factions in all of Honkai Star Rail. They monopolize history and information. This is a well-known thing. And there's an entire Aeon and its followers and emanators devoted to this exact purpose, construing and changing facts of history and past events to throw people off what actually happened. And there's somebody like Herta who created a simulated universe with simulated versions of the Aeons to deliberately ask them questions, learn secrets that you just cannot find. Even the smartest people in the universe and emanators of erudition don't know all the answers. There's something in Honkai Star Rail called the Circle of Knowledge. What it essentially means is the circle being all of the knowledge of the universe and everything. All the things that are known. The followers of erudition are always trying to expand that circle, uncover and learn more things, obviously. This goes for our own real world too, but there's a character called Polka Kakamon, who weaponizes the butterfly effect to kill any geniuses trying to expand the circle of knowledge. So there are even genius society that are trying to prevent knowledge from expanding beyond the circle. And the IPC themselves have their own reasons to monopolize history and facts, considering they are more than likely followers of Ouroboros instead of preservation. At least the vast majority of the IPC, because as you all know, everything that the IPC does not align with the preservation and their principles, but it does align with ferocity. That's a topic we've already discussed on this channel, but the point is, there's a lot of reasons to construed facts in this game of history and past events, and what's actually taking place in Amphoreus right now is not even that much different than the history that we know of Nanuk. Sure, the planet's name and a few little details, but around the end of the Swarm disaster, it has been stated that the first mechanical emperor, Rupert, was present around the time Nanuk ascended. Nanuk destroyed his homeworld, and the Trailblaze Aeon was present. Now, obviously the Trailblaze Aeon's not present in Amphoreus, but we are, and oh look, this very vague, mysterious, inorganic being that just happens to be in Amphoreus talking to Herd at the end, that has also infiltrated Amphoreus. Not suspicious at all, and I already know it's a very common theory, which we already talked about as well in our last video, that the inorganic equation could be a root cause of the Black Tide. So even the facts that we are given about Nanuk's ascension aren't really that different than what we're actually playing through right now. And think of our own real world. Do we actually know for a fact that the history we are taught is 100%? Has it not been changed over the thousands of years since that event actually happened? Construing history and facts is a big part of Honkai Star Rail, and using that part of Honkai Star Rail in a significant way to tell a story about Nanuk and Amphoreus, I think is a very good way to use that part of the lore in the game for a crazy plot twist in Amphoreus. And since Amphoreus, again, is based off the Mobius strip and can be a past memory loop paradox, Amphoreus being a very secretive and unknown world, all of this makes sense. We also know there's a Lord Ravager called Sun Devourer, which also fits the Flame Reaver. Again, we don't know the specifics, but there's a lot of interesting ways they could tie this all together that gives Amphoreus the most significance of any world we've been to so far, using Nanuk's false history in a meaningful and impactful way to throw us off the scent of what's happening here, but not in an outright lying to us way, because again, they've built the idea that some history and facts are probably fabricated by the IPC or the Enigmata or someone else. And the whole significance of 3 Aeons being involved here really checks out. And this whole idea of an Aeon being born in a main Trailblaze story quest is something we've already had too with Penacony and the embryo that Sunday was trying to create at the end. If at the end of the day this is all wrong, it's still fun to theorize and speculate about because there is so much pointing towards this. Plus they're building up Phainon to be this very likable, lovable hero protagonist for a reason. This would also put so much more weight at the opening cutscene, March 7th and her past, how important the remembrance is and why they're involved. The remembrance is trying to preserve the universe's memory in case its finality, its demise. That is another detail. According to Herda, she does not understand why Nanook of Destruction was born, since Terminus of the Finality was already traversing the universe before Nanook appeared. Herda then states, is destruction not included in the finality? We know so little about the secrets of all the paths and their eons. She even uses the example of harmony absorbing order because those paths obviously collided. But if Amphoreus is this weird time, memory, infinite cycle paradox, then it actually explains a lot about how an Aeon can ascend that has a similar path to another Aeon. and how a Lord Ravager could possibly help aid in the ascension of their own Aeon, or maybe even try to prevent it for all we know. Since the Lord Ravagers themselves are scared of Nanook, and Acheron is somebody trying to annihilate her own Aeon, which she's an emanator of, so the idea of a Lord Ravager trying to prevent this as well isn't even off the table, if that's what the Flame Reaver is doing, currently trying to stop the Chrysos heirs, the Flame Chasers. Again, this is not a video I planned on making, but I couldn't stop thinking about these details and I just didn't get the chance to include them in my last video, so I wanted to expand on that video, because at the end of the day, this is talking about the greater overarching story of Amphoreus, and it's gonna set the tone for the future of Honkai Star Rail even after Amphoreus. And I know Amphoreus and its story has been sort of slow for some people, because they're really trying to build up the world lore of this story, so we haven't really got to see the IPC and a lot of the other factions outside of Amphoreus in a while, but it is said that the Constance of Dalia, who I speculate to be a cremator, is actually going to be making an appearance in Amphoreus, which I'm super excited about. Another faction and follower of the destruction. I'm always reading your guys' comments, so let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed the video. In the future, I'm going to be making another lore video on the Genius Society themselves, all of the members, talking about them, so stay tuned for that. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.